Good morning. I think we're on air now for our webinar. Sorry about the slight delay. That was due to some classic old-fashioned technical difficulties. So yeah, I apologise for that. But certainly woken up on a Friday morning. So good morning. My name is Rob Michael Phillips, and I'm here to do a webinar on person-centred practices in CPA. And the subtitle of the presentation is First Steps in Transforming How We Plan Support in Mental Health. I think the reason for the subtitle is that it is sometimes very difficult to go from where we are at the moment in most mental health services to the lack of a person-centered approach to a complete person-centered approach in CPA. So one of the things I wanted to focus on was on steps that we can take to start to make this happen. So by way of a quick introduction, this is me. I'm currently sitting in Helen's house at HSA HQ, and this is my one-page profile. So any of you who are familiar with HSA's work will know about the one-page profile. Straightforward way of gathering and recording and sharing key bits of person-centered information. So things that people appreciate about me, which there are some of, I can see there, the things that are important to me, and things about how best to support. We'll be returning to the one-page profile a little bit later on in the presentation today. I should say that the webinar should last around about 20 minutes, 25 minutes from now, and there'll be a short amount of time for questions at the end, hopefully, if so a couple of key things out of my one-page profile. I can't think when I'm hungry. Taking breaks is essential for me and for those around me, and I'm a huge music fanatic. Why am I mentioning this at the start of the webinar? It's because this is kind of what the person-centered approach is all about in a nutshell. It's about really understanding what's important to me, what's important for me, how best to support the person that we're working with. So the top example might seem like a really minor thing that I can't think when I'm hungry, but for me that is a really, really big problem. And were I to have, for example, a CPA meeting scheduled for around about 11:45 in the morning, you'd be likely to get a very different Rob than you would if you had it just after lunch. So it's little tiny things like that that are really important to the person or for the person can make such a big difference with the person-centered approach. And then in terms of what we're really here to do is that this is a quote from Harper Lee from To Kill a Mockingbird, that you never really understand a person until you consider things from their point of view, climb into their skin and walk around it. Now that is obviously something that is extremely difficult to achieve with everyone we work with, but the person-centered approach is about having processes that we can follow and repeat and make consistent, that allow us to see things consistently from other people's point of view. I think that sometimes it can feel like you're smashing into a brick wall with trying to introduce a more person-centered approach, particularly in mental health services. We have a very entrenched prescriptive medical model, which even if people's intentions are to be as person-centered as they can be, often the processes and systems that we work within don't make that easy or can be actively against it. So, but I think something which I would like to try and stress today is that it is possible to make changes which make working in a more person-centered way possible. I did a presentation on Tuesday with a guy called Isaac Samuels, who is a fantastic guy, fantastic speaker, and also has a history of using mental health services. And that was the thing that he wants to really reinforce, is that there are steps you can take, and it makes such a difference to people if you can even take a small step towards a more person-centered approach, and to keep that positive message in mind. And that you have to be prepared to try different things. Your plan A or B may not work, but the plan C might be the one that takes root. So it's just to be positive and be prepared to keep trying and keep learning is absolutely critical to making this a reality. So this is a slide that represents for me kind of where we where we are now in a lot of cases of the typical approach to CPA and care and support planning. Now, it's a slightly more stylized image. It's something that everyone can relate to, but actually in terms of sitting in front of or standing in front of strangers who hold all the power and are asking you questions basically about what's wrong with you and what you need to do differently, it is not a million miles away from what what a lot of CPA meetings certainly have been. The first one I went to as a member of staff with somebody was very much like that, and it's a fundamentally misguided way of trying to work with somebody in a constructive way. So, and again, just referring back to the presentation I did with Isaac on Tuesday, he's absolutely clear that this is pretty much what it was like. That he'd be sitting there, people would say, run through the list of bad things he could potentially be doing, and then sort of prescribe him whatever they felt he needed. So this is what we're trying to get away from. So onto what we can do in terms of person-centered practices and CPA. A really great place to have a look about what's a really good practice in CPA would be is to use the TLAP. That's the Think Local Act Personal Care and Support Planning tool that we were really pleased at HSA to be heavily involved in developing. What it does is it demonstrates the best practice in care and support planning, often in the framework of the new integrated care and support planning process. But it does it through a series of characters. So each of these characters, Michaela, Kathy, Jim, Millie, Imran, and Ted, have all got different needs. So you've got a young person with complex health needs, you've got an older person with dementia. And in terms of a mental health example, if you're trying to sort of show people what a person-centered approach could be like and what difference it could make, the example to look at is Imran, who Isaac, who I was mentioning earlier. Isaac and I were very pleased to be able to work with a local authority in Bedfordshire and to basically fictionalise a real person to give a best practice example of what care and support planning could be like. So sometimes I think the notion of a person-centered approach is quite difficult for people to understand, but people can relate to the stories in the TLAP tool and actually see what a difference that some of the practices that we're looking at can make. So it's a really good place to start in terms of showing people where we want to be headed and sort of what the end goal is in terms of a best practice idea. But for the rest of for the webinar, I just wanted to share a few ideas about how you can take a little step into a person-centered approach, how you can start to sort of sneak it in, if you will, into normal practice, how you can maybe influence a meeting that would be traditionally very consultant-led, or just to start to think in a slightly different way. So. And it's about trying to give you well, not necessarily today, but for practitioners and professionals, to develop a toolkit of different person-centered approaches that you can use, you can take the right tool out at the right time and use that in the most appropriate way that you can. So, if you only do one thing, isn't to have a picture of me on your screen. That's the last thing anyone needs. But if you only do one thing, my suggestion is that you look at one-page profiles. There is, in terms of the single thing that can make the biggest difference in changing how someone's perceived and how someone is supported, that having those three pieces of information, or those three sets of information about what people like and admire, what people appreciate about you, what's important to you, and how best to support you, is incredibly powerful, particularly for some people with mental health needs who've not ever been asked, ever been told what people like and admire and appreciate about them, and not even used to thinking about themselves in those ways. It makes a huge difference. And this is, if you're approaching a CPA meeting with somebody you're working with, then you can work on a one-page profile with them it doesn't have to be a team-wide thing. It doesn't have to be a service-wide thing. There's advice all over our YouTube channel and over our on the website about how you can do effective one-page profiles. I'm certainly very, very happy if anyone's struggling with that and wants to get a bit of advice for people to email me, and I'll do my best to answer questions. But even walking into a consultant-led meeting or circulating someone's one-page profile before the meeting starts can radically change how the conversation goes in the meeting and get people thinking differently. So your goals need to be, of course, about things that are important to you. Your goals need to connect with something that's important to you. You need to get a chance to show the qualities that people like and admire about you, and also our support needs to take into account what an individual feels is the best support for them. So if there's one thing to do, it's start with a one-page profile, and please do get in touch if you want some support in how to do that. Another person-centered tool which is very easy to put into an existing service model is the tool called 4+1 questions. It's the reason it's called 4+1 is because there's 4 questions for analysis and 1 for planning. So it's a simple 4-question process. What have we tried? What have we learned? What are we pleased about? What are we concerned about? And that gives you a really good framework to consider where you've been, over a period of time, say if it's working with an individual person or trying to fix a particular problem. And then collating that information into the actions of what do we need to do next. And the reason I included this one is that this is doable in, for example, a key working session or in a one-to-one session. If you just allocate, it's very important you allocate the same amount of time and you stick to it to each section. So if it's 5 minutes a box, it's 5 minutes a box. You stick to that, because otherwise we naturally tend to gravitate towards what have we tried and what are we concerned about, and very rarely mention what we might be pleased about. But if you're coming up to a CPA meeting and you want to do something a little bit more effective or different than just saying, oh, so how's it gone, to somebody, and someone sort of sits there looking blankly and says, oh, it's all right, then this is a really good way of structuring a conversation which will get an enormous amount of information that you wouldn't get otherwise, and that obviously informs a more successful planning process. And just as an example of that, this is a 4+1 which I did for myself for when I was looking for a new job, when I was coming to work for HSA. I looked at everything I'd done before. My long-suffering wife did the notes for me as I paced around the living room, but I came up with a huge amount of information. It made me think about my career and what I wanted differently, and it took half an hour, 35 minutes to produce that amount of information, which really helped make a better decision. So again, this is a tool which is really straightforward and can just be brought into your practice. It doesn't require any permission or anything like that, because it's just a structured way of asking questions. I suppose maybe the most important thing about a personalised approach and taking a person-centred approach to support planning is that you focus on aspiration, and that you're thinking about what the person wants to achieve. Now that can cause difficulties, because it's not always easy for people to think long term, particularly if they've got a more depressive condition. And someone's honest answer to the question, where do you want to be in a year's time, might be that they're wanting to be dead in a year's time. So we've found that changing that question from sort of where do you want to be in 5 years, where do you want to be in 6 months, which is the sort of nightmare question we all get in the job interview and we can't answer, to change it to a question like, if I could, I would. If you were freed of the concerns of your illness, for example, if you weren't feeling depressed, if you could, what would you do? And that question seems to be much easier to answer and to relate to than a where do you see yourselves in 5 years' time type of question. And a concern that people do have about talking about aspiration is what if people ask to do something that is wildly unrealistic or can't be achieved? And while you can never say that wouldn't happen, my experience and the experience of most people I've talked to are that is that this isn't what people want. What people want are things that are profoundly important, but also very ordinary. So this is the picture here is a record of an if I could I would statement for a client I was working with to facilitate her CPA meeting, and she just wanted to spend more time with her daughters, and that was it. She wanted to spend more time with her daughters. That in itself led to a fundamental change in her service provision, because she was in a complicated situation with her ex-partner had custody of the children. Her ex-partner had a new wife. There was a very difficult relationship between the two women, and the client we were working with had a terrible fear that if her mental health issues impacted on the time that she did have with her kids, that would somehow get back to her ex-partner and his new wife, and that would mean that the access that she had and that she valued so much would be taken away. So the upshot of that for her was that she completely withdrew from services when the children were around, because she didn't want them to find out that that she was still seeing someone or getting help. And it was only through talking about the aspiration and finding out what was so important to her that she would change everything to spend more time with the girls, that the team were able to understand that and to put support in place, that she could have a late night phone call after the girls had gone to bed when they were staying with her, because that helped her feel confident that she wouldn't be sort of spotted receiving help, but also it got her the help she needed at the time when it was really, really important to her and when she was under her most stress. So again, a focus on aspiration and being brave enough to say, yeah, we're going to ask, and if it turns out that it causes a problem, then it causes a problem. If someone desperately wants to do something unrealistic, then we'll figure that out. But for the huge majority of people, people's aspirations are very much rooted in what's vital to them and what really, really works, what's really important to them personally. So an image here just to sort of reinforce that if this was the person we're working with, just the knowledge of what his diagnosis was would be only helpful to a tiny extent in working out what you could do with him, what support you could plan with him, what help he needed, and so it's absolutely critical that you can try and sneak some of these tools in to try and start using them. It gives you that richer information that you need. One final thing I wanted to, a particular thing I wanted to point out was using some of these Think cards. I don't know whether you would have seen these, but these are they're conversation cards made by a company called Think, and we do a lot of we think they're fantastic at HSA. The picture of what you can see in front of you is one's about well-being, but there are also sets on one-page profiles and on loads of other different aspects of support. And what these do is just give you a slightly different entry into a conversation that might be going not going particularly well. So you can say, if you imagine sitting in a one-to-one session and trying to talk about what's important to someone, instead of just sitting there and asking questions and getting a blank response, pull a packet of cards out of your bag and sort of take a card. Let's ask each other questions from this. And it's just a sort of a little. Just a slightly different approach, which can fundamentally change how your sort of your conversation goes. And really, when it comes down to it, the person-centered approach is all about having different conversations with people. So I really recommend trying out the set of using the Think cards if you can. And if you want to get in contact with me, I will see if I can find a couple of sets around here that I can send out to anyone who's attending today. So if you want to get in contact with me and drop me an email, I'll make sure that we can get a set out. So the time seems to have absolutely whizzed past. I'm astonished really, but the last message I sort of wanted to say is to be brave, to take. Sometimes it's important just to sort of do what you can, even if there are struggles towards you say, for example, putting a full person-centered CPA process into an existing system, to be brave and try things, because generally speaking, the result of using more person-centered approaches is that the work you do and the way in which the effectiveness of the work with clients is enhanced, and people notice that. So if you can have a more effective care planning process based on information from a one-page profile, people will notice and they will be interested. So just being brave and trying things is an important step. And obviously, if you need support along the way, then that's what we're here for, and always happy to sort of answer queries over email or Twitter or Facebook. Another way in which you can get involved and get advice is to join our learning community, Helen Sanderson Associates community, and that's a great way to sort of to share practice amongst sort of like-minded people, to ask questions of all the members of the HSC team, not me, not just me, and to sort of to share practice, look for different things that you might like to try. So please do get in touch with us and sign up. It's a free community, and it's something that we've just recently launched, and it's going really well. So please get involved. And you'll see there a screenshot from the learning community about different discussion boards and topics and who's posted. So that is an absolute flying run through person-centered practice in CPA and how to sort of take the first steps. And thank you very, very much for listening. If there are any questions, I think you can type them in a little box. But if there aren't any questions right now, then please contact me via email or via the learning community, and we'll answer them then. And the last thing to say is that this is contact details. My email's there at the top of the slide, and you can also follow me on Twitter and follow HSA on Twitter. And there's all sorts of information on the YouTube channel and Facebook page as well. So thank you very, very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I'll deal with them now, or I will, if none come through now, you can always submit them by email, and I'll respond and circulate them to whoever's attended. So thank you very much for listening.